Hello everyone and welcome back to Silicon Sounds, music for the rest of us. Today I'm going to have a really quick, non-scripted look and discussion about the Kbear KS2. While I might be a little late to the party, better late than never, the party never ends, so you can never be late. I'm going to talk a little bit about my listening experience with these. Admittedly, I did not expect much. I do own a Kbear Believe, which I love very much. And I've had a KB04, which people harp on, which I sold eventually, because I outgrew it very quickly. But I didn't know what to expect with the KS2, and for some reason, I was a little bit resistant in getting it. But thanks to some good people, I got it, and I'm happy I did. It's a surprising sound quality. It goes for around, I believe it's $22 or $23 US, $30 Canadian shipped to me. And I'm very happy. The sound signature is quite pleasing to me. It is a hybrid with a 10 millimeter, I believe, dynamic driver and a balanced armature in for highs and mid frequencies. I'm not exactly sure how it's crossed over. In these budget devices, you never really know the internal workings, how things are actually going to work. But this works very well. Construction quality is quite good. As we can see in this video, there's one of the bass ports, quite prominent right there. We can see very clearly the dynamic driver, and if we look very closely in the nozzle, you might be able to see the balanced armature driver in there. So how does this sound? Surprisingly good. Again, this is not scripted. Just wanted to get this out of here. In terms of the video, I felt I had to say something about it. For the price, you're getting what I would consider to be very controlled and mature tuning for this price. I'm going to compare it to another one that people seem to love, but might be controversial, as I prefer the KS2. Lots of my listening was done with different dongles and amps. You really don't need anything hyper expensive or high-end to drive the KS2. It's quite easy to drive. I was using one of my favorites. This is the Shanling UA2. Still remains to this day. Probably one of my two top dongles, this one and the Apogee Groove, which, by the way, worked quite well with the KS2 as well. Bass. We're talking about a very controlled, almost bass head level for some people, not for me. When paired with the proper tips and source, the bass is extremely well controlled. It goes deep, lots of texture there, surprisingly good for something in this price range, to be quite honest with you. Mids, somewhat recessed. Even with the amounts of bass that the KS2 can put out there in terms of quantity, mind you, its quality is very good for the price. They're not overshadowed. There's not a lot of mid-bass bleed, I find. It's not as apparent in male voices. When I was listening to Tender-Hearted Lover by Mr. Stoddart there, one of my favorite vocalists, it was strange in that his voice actually sounded less full than I have on some much more expensive IEMs, of course, but still was very present. You can tell it was pushed back a little bit compared to, for example, an IT01X from my Basso, which costs 5 to 6 times what this does. But still the quality was there. The treble on these is quite pleasing. Fairly good, moderately extended. In fact, I'd say better than moderately extended. Good air, articulate. One thing I really like is that there's no harshness at all. Sounded very good. The KS2 surprisingly lends itself to many different musical genres. I primarily listen to jazz, smooth jazz, house music, jazzy house music, some live music as well. And it really showed itself quite well. In terms of imaging is believable, which I like more than overblown in one dimension or the other. There are many IEMs that will give you fantastic width, but depth and height are minimal or marginal, and that just makes things sound unreal to me. Doesn't sound very believable. The KS2 avoids that by not being fantastically outside of your head, although the width is quite good, but the depth and the height are not forgotten as well. And if anything, it sounds quite pleasing and not overblown in one dimension, as I said before, and more erring towards the side of natural. Not as good as some higher priced IEMs, but quite pleasing. So all in all, fantastic package. I thought, again, I had a lot against these in the beginning for some reason or another, but as I received them, popped them in my ear and started listening over the many hours I have over the last 2 weeks of owning them, I can tell you that they are a keeper for me. I'm keeping them. They sound quite good, and particularly when used with wide bore tips. For example, W01s from BGVP, some of my favorite tips, although they are quite shallow. What allows them to work with the KS2, as you can see, it's quite a wide port here, and it sticks out a lot. So this, when you put this on, it sticks out enough so that it will, at least with my ears, make a good contact, and really sounds good. Now let me bring in the elephant in the room. This is the KZ, oops, let me get this, EDXpro. The EDX is legendary. Let me just put it out there. It's a legendary IEM. The EDXpro is tuned a little different, styled a little different, of course. It is a chunky IEM, to be honest. Build quality is good, although the spout is plastic. It feels very plasticky. So does the KS2, but I have to say that the KS2 build quality, in my hands at least, the feel and with a metal nozzle and whatnot, I'm not sure if it's even metal, it might be plastic, but it just feels like the KS2 is, the build quality is a little bit better. Price, these go for about $22, $23 Canadian, while the KS2 goes for approximately $29 to $30, so about a 30% different in price. Mind you, they're still in that $30, $20 to $30 price region. Now, how are these different? Now, this might be an unpopular to some, because people who like the EDXpro almost have a religious fervor about it, which I think is wrong in any kind of device. I would say that the KS2 is a more refined EDXpro. And why do I say that? Well, imaging, definitely, the KS2 is superior. Let's just put it out there. It's more expansive. There's more separation in the instruments. The EDX Pro sounds, again, fantastic for its price, but it can sound congested with very busy material. The KS2 can as well, but it resists that sound of congestion a lot more than the EDX Pro, if that makes sense. In terms of smoothness, let's go to the bass. Both produce a large amount of bass, or at least in my opinion. What differentiates these two is the quality. The quality of the bass on the KS2 is just so much better than the EDX Pro. It's tighter, it's cleaner, it's quite surprising actually in terms of its presentation. More textured, in particular with bass demanding tracks. The KS2 just maintains its composure at moderate volume levels, of course. None of these are really designed to play crazy loud in your ear, although the EDX Pro will do that. In terms of mids, I find the KS2 is more pleasing, a little bit more natural, less, none of these are shouty. I wouldn't say any of them are shouty, definitely not, but the tendency to do that is much less in the KS2 versus the EDX Pro, but that really is sourced and of course the track selection dependent. Treble, both quite good extension, but I would give it to the KS2 in terms of articulation and quality. You are, of course, buying an IEM that's 30% more than this, but given the price range of either or, if I had to choose between the two, as you can tell right now, I prefer the KS2. This might be an unpopular choice among many people. I might get some pushback, but that is my personal opinion. When it comes to varying musical genres, I think the KS2 lends itself more than the EDX Pro. The EDX Pro, though, is a winner and something I will still recommend when people pop it in their ear. particularly when you're listening to house music or EDM tracks and whatnot. And if you've never listened to the KS2, the EDXpro will definitely surprise you and really bring a smile to your face, particularly for the price. But that being said, after popping the KS2 in my ear and listening to it side by side as early as today, for the sake of this review, I can easily say that the KS2, in my opinion, is a superior product in terms of sound quality. So that's my quick look at the KS2. I want to thank everybody. Subscribe to the channel. This is a keeper. They're both keepers in my opinion, but if I had to keep one or the other and I only had one choice, I would keep the Kbear KS2. Thanks again for supporting the channel, and take care everybody.